My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm speaking with John Lee. He is the founder of CustomMobile.app. He is a software product manager by day and a small business owner on the side. That's the CustomMobile.app website. He customizes mobile apps for podcasts and networks that nurture listener relationships and really help build member-supported content businesses. So it sounds like it's kind of a niche product. Are there many competitors in that area, John?
No, actually, I think we're the only agency that makes it affordable for the independent podcaster and independent content creators to have their own branded mobile app on the app stores. Typically, these things are only accessible to the bigger companies, but we found a model to make it accessible and affordable for everyone.
You came on today really to talk about some philosophy. I find it really interesting, some of the stuff that you wrote to me, and I really thought it would be great to have you on and just really dig in. But I think more interesting is your background and how you ended up in software development, that sort of thing. From where you began. So you were born and raised in upstate New York, went to school up there. Is that
Well, not upstate,
not upstate?
actually in Queens, New York City. But before I get
Okay.
into that, thank you, David, for inviting me onto your show. I don't have these conversations very often, and it's like my second passion. I love having philosophical conversations, and I wish I could have more of them. And you've given me an opportunity to have another one. So thank you for having me on your show. I was born and raised in Queens, New York City. So that's a borough of New York City. Grew up in the suburbs. Went to university in upstate New York at Cornell and studied animal science. So I've got a bit of a bioscience background. After university, I lived abroad for a couple of years in Korea, doing some social work, working with kids in the foster care system there, teaching English, being a mentor over there for about 2 years. And in that time, decided to come back to the US for grad school. So I went to get my business degree in social policy at Brandeis up in Massachusetts, and which kind of opened the door for me to have a proper job or a proper career from that point forward. And I found myself uh, being interested in software and making a move and pivoting my career in that direction. I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I found a great, comfortable place. Like this is it. This is the kind of work that I've been looking for, and I'm glad I found it a bit later in my career. But plan to be in this space going forward. I really enjoy the work.
I'm curious what your life was like growing up. What did your parents do?
So my parents are immigrants from Korea. My dad had a bunch of different jobs. He was a taxi driver in New York City for many years. I remember the taxi being in our driveway. He also worked at different dry cleaners. My mother worked at different nail salons. Eventually, she opened up her own salon, and I think she had that and ran that for about 20 years. She was really the consistent breadwinner for the family. They were always working, both of them, but it was really her business that helped us survive, put food on the table, go to university, all that. So that was the environment I grew up in.
And do you have siblings?
I have a younger sister, yes.
Now, once you decided to go to university, I, I I think you said that you were planning on becoming a veterinarian, and that
Mhm.
that shifted, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, all growing up, I've loved animals. That seems to be a theme from when I was very young. I'd love creatures, animals, and so it made sense maybe in middle school, high school to think about going into a field where that was involved. And so I chose animal science as my degree, and Cornell was a good school for that. So I was able to get in there and start that. But very quickly into my education, I realized this was probably not the right career path. But I kept the major because it was still very interesting to learn about biology, and I could incorporate some of that pre-medical courses into it. So I did keep the major.
I'm guessing growing up, your parents had influence over your philosophy and your work ethic, and really just probably helped motivate you along whatever path you chose. Um, was there any influence from your parents kind of guiding you towards veterinary, or?
No, not that I can think of. They weren't really ever pushy or wanted me to be anything in particular. So I don't really remember that being a part of my growing up. I did see them working all the time, so I guess that rubbed off on me. I mean, I wouldn't call myself um, a hard worker back then. I didn't really have a work ethic. I didn't know how to study properly. Growing up in a maybe an immigrant family where the parents aren't always home, it was really up to the kids to manage ourselves and um, kind of raise ourselves. So there was a lot of independence growing up. I think really it was only into my 20s, late 20s, that I discovered or developed a work ethic and really around the subject matter that I found interesting. So going to grad school was completely different from going to undergrad. Grad school was more of a conscious choice. I knew what I wanted to study, and so that really helped build the motivation and give me the drive to put the hours in and develop that work ethic in graduate school. I think for undergrad, a lot of it was still me growing up emotionally and socially and learning some of these life skills. So I didn't get as much out of my undergraduate years as I could have.
And what motivated you to go to Korea and teach English?
That was just an opportunity I had. So I was working in New York City in a biomedical laboratory after university, and I had applied to medical schools. Um, so those applications were out there. I had a couple of months for them to come back, and I didn't want to keep working in the lab, so I decided to take some time off. We had a family friend who was a missionary, a Christian missionary, working out in Seoul. He was just a year or two older than myself, and so he was already there doing this very interesting work. And so I got connected to him and was able to go and support him in that social work. And I thought I'd be there for 2 months and come back to the States and start school, but ended up being there for a little over 2 years.
How would you describe your personal philosophy, and maybe what were some of the influences?
So I did grow up in the church, in the Christian church. Um, so I had that as a foundation. I don't think my faith really became my own until my early 20s, close to the end of university. And then throughout my 20s and into my 30s, that was really when I began to examine what I believed and why I believed what I believed. So digging into the fundamentals of my faith, um, getting to grips with it and the philosophy underneath it. So I am a Christian, and I think my worldview is definitely a Christian theistic worldview.
One of the things that struck me in one of the messages that you sent to me, well, there was a series of things that struck me. Really, the relationship between free will and rationality, the
Mm,
relationship between purpose and meaning, the the objectivity of morality, the requirements for happiness, and maybe some of the presuppositions of gender dysphoria. Like all these things really kind of piqued my curiosity to really get um, your take on these topics and maybe broaden my understanding of them and so I'm just eager to dig in. Maybe we can start with the requirements for happiness.
Sure. And again, I'd love to hear from you as well. This is a conversation, and
Yeah.
I learn as I speak, and I think as I speak. So every time I have a conversation, I'm looking to learn as well. So I think what I was thinking about with that phrase was happiness. Like happiness is a goal, or it's presented to us as a goal. We all want to be happy. That's the goal of life. But I think what I've come across over the years is happiness is not best pursued as a primary goal. It seems to be like a great side effect of pursuing something else. And if you're pursuing the right goal, happiness seems to be like a symptom or an indicator that you are pursuing the right thing, the right goal, which is not happiness itself, it's something else. So I think, for example, um, people are looking for they're looking for different things, right? They think maybe achieving a particular career will make them happy. So they're pursuing the career as the primary goal. And if I think if it's the right career and if it's the kind of work that they were made for, um, that they will find themselves happy in the pursuit of that career. So I think I was trying to make that distinction, like happiness not as a goal in itself, but as a natural consequence and maybe a signal that you're pursuing the right thing. And if you're not happy, that may be a signal that you're pursuing the wrong thing. What do you think
Right.
about that?
No, I think you're right on, and I think you're alluding to um, purpose and meaning. So
Yeah.
I think you could use those words interchangeably, but the way that you phrased it was the relationship between purpose and meaning. Um,
Yeah.
and so, and I can speak from my own experience after being in the fire service for 23 years. I identified as a firefighter, as a fire officer. That was my purpose on earth. I
Mm-hmm.
left the fire service and I'm no longer a firefighter. So that
Mm-hmm.
identity is gone. But really, what I was doing, what I was passionate about, and what I found meaning in the work um, was connected to my purpose. And what I've discovered is that my purpose is really to help others in some capacity. That's what brings me joy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that in so many different occupations or pursuits. Um, so, still trying to formulate how I would identify myself if I was, you know, explaining it to somebody, because
Mm-hmm.
the easiest thing is I'm a retired firefighter, um,
Mm-hmm.
but that really doesn't uh, speak to what my passions are.
Right. Yeah. That seems to be more backward facing than kind of forward facing. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. The distinction that I was trying to make, you described perfectly. I think people do use those terms interchangeably, but for whatever reason, I took some time to think about it a couple months back, and I was like, I don't think they're the same thing. I think purpose is required for meaning, and like purpose informs meaning. So for you, like you said, your purpose was to be a firefighter, and therefore everything you did in your life became meaningful within that purposeful context. And I think of stories. There's a hero. The hero has a purpose to go to the mountain, maybe kill the dragon, and he's called to that purpose. And so whatever he experiences on that journey has a meaning. It's meaningful toward achieving the purpose, whether it's suffering or good things. They're all meaningful because they're helping them along the journey to achieving the purpose. If there was no purpose, then the suffering would just be meaningless. It would just be brute suffering, or whatever fortunate events happen, they would just be lucky, or again, they'd be meaningless. But it's only when there is a purpose in the future that our lives are like pointed towards, does it kind of go back in time and make all the different events in our lives meaningful toward that purpose. I think that's what I was pointing toward in the relationship between purpose and meaning.
And how about what you were alluding to when you wrote the relationship between free will and rationality?
Yeah, so as I think about free will, I know one of the bigger debates, maybe not now, but in the recent past, was, do we really have free will? Like, or are we determined by the physics in our brain, physics and chemistry, by the laws of physics and chemistry, to do and think whatever we're doing and thinking? And so as I thought about that, I came across different arguments saying, well, to believe in anything rationally is to believe that thing for good reasons. So it's to choose to believe something based on good reasons. So when I thought about rationality and believing things for good reasons, and actually choosing, you have to choose to believe things for good reasons, I realized that rationality requires the freedom to choose. It requires genuine free will in order to be rational. And so with that in place, I was thinking, well, if you believe that you don't have free will, that means everything that you're thinking and believing is by definition irrational, because you didn't choose to believe them based on good reasons. So even the belief that you, and this gets a little bit twisted, but even the belief that you don't have free will is itself an irrational belief, which kind of crumbled it all down for me. And so I do believe that free will is necessary, that it's real and it's necessary for rationality. Did you follow that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes perfect sense. Um, I I always believed in free will, but I hadn't made the connection between free will and rationality.
Yeah. So it's funny that a lot of these really smart people, and even maybe philosophers that are saying we don't have free will, are at the same time like appealing to our rationality to believe them based on good reasons. It, it seems upside down, but yeah.
And I'm curious about the objectivity of morality. Can you talk about what you mean
Mhm.
by that?
Yeah. So for that, as a Christian theist, I believe that there are objective moral values and moral obligations in the world. So that means there are moral values, like maybe the value of human life or the value of life in general. And there are moral obligations like mm, thou shalt not murder. Like, these things are true, whether I believe in them or not, whether anyone believes in them or not. These things are true objectively. They're outside of ourselves. So um, that's my position on morality. I think there are many people who don't take that view, and they believe that morality is subjective, meaning it's relative to the person. What's true for me is true for me in terms of morality, and what's true for you is true for you. There is no objective standard that sits outside of the human race. um, to guide behavior.
Yeah, I would agree that morality is objective. I think that there are universal truths that span human history. Um, I feel like there has always been an understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Uh, and you framed that within uh, Christianity,
Mhm.
but it's not necessarily confined to Christianity. I mean, those morals existed pre
Mhm.
Christianity.
Absolutely. But I think this is a great segue, and thank you for bringing it up. I think the people that believe in objective morals but are not theists, let's just say theists, that they don't believe in a God that defines and sets those objective moral truths. I think they have a really hard time, maybe an insurmountable challenge, to justify where do those objective moral values and obligations come from if there is no divine law maker. So that's a gap that I've come across, and I don't know if you are a theist or not. If you're not, I'd love to hear if you've thought about that. Where do they come from?
Well, I think that um, there is a sense of community just in humankind that we all are part of one group, you know, um, life on Earth, and that we all serve a purpose within that, um, within our lifetime. We serve a purpose to those around us, and that purpose, I believe, is to intentionally add value to those around us, and I think that morality isn't confined to either theism or atheism. I think that morality is something that is established when any group of people come together. There is a consensus of what is right behavior to exist within a community, something that is ingrained in us, that survival is dependent on coming together as a community
Mm-hmm.
and working together to survive and flourish and
Mm-hmm.
reproduce and uh, exist,
Yeah.
perpetuate perpetuate humankind.
Mm-hmm. I hear you, and I'm going to try to articulate my thoughts maybe for the first time around this. So it sounds to me like you're wanting to ground universal human morality in almost our evolutionary history and biology. The fact that we are social primates means there is a kind of quote unquote objective way for social primates to flourish as as a group.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I can probably buy that, but maybe if we take it one level further, um, like the reality is there have been and there are many different groups in the world, groups of human beings, social primates that are scattered across the world. They've all got different cultures, and if we go like maybe one step above the very maybe foundational moral values of the hunter gatherer group, maybe those would be like, you know, don't kill don't kill your neighbor within your in group. That may be like a very basic um, core obligation, moral obligation. But if you go a little bit bigger, and as societies grow, and you see, you know, just larger, more developed societies all across the world, there are societies where it's okay. The moral is to love your neighbor, right? There are societies that say love your neighbor, whether they're um, in your particular in group or not. And then there are other societies where they say it's okay to eat your neighbor. Like there are cannibalistic societies in the world where it's perfectly okay, maybe even morally virtuous to kill a member of another tribe and eat them. So they do get quite different depending on where that group is and how they've maybe developed over time. The expression of some of those core values can be quite divergent. And so when I see that, those differences, I think um, on that view and looking at reality and the differences in the moral values of different cultures over time and even today in different parts of the world, it it seems to me you couldn't hold a view that morality is objective because there are all these different expressions of it that are so different. Like love your neighbor versus eat your neighbor is completely different as a moral value. Um, so what do you make of that?
Well, I think that that argument could be made even within Christianity, just within Christianity. If you exclude all other groups of society, there is divergent within the
Mm-hmm.
Christian church. You know, there's different beliefs, different sects, but if all you have to do is believe in Jesus Christ and the crucifixion to gain salvation, and then it's acceptable to to do other evils.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just and
So,
and we don't
mm-hmm.
have to get into, because I and I'm just playing devil's advocate here for the conversation, um, because I think there's good and evil in all groups of society, and it's um, not,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
So
it's
Davis,
not.
I thank you for that question, and I think it's sharpening my own thinking about it actually. So you're right. Um, Even within the different Christian groups, there are Christians that behave badly, and so I don't think the argument I'm making is just because there is difference um, that morality is relative. I don't think that's the argument I'm making. So that was a mistake on my part. I think in the Christian worldview, we believe that there is an objective moral standard. So all these divergent expressions of that are incorrect. They're wrong and incorrect expressions of the moral standard. I think in the biological view of morality, from that perspective, okay, so social primates, um, because we're social primates, we evolved to be these kinds of individuals and we live in these kinds of groups, and therefore there is an objective set of moral values and obligations that are ideal for social primates.
And I think that in any society, there's going to be individuals that spend more time thinking about that than others. And they'll be the ones that share their thoughts on what's right and what's wrong. And, you know, as that group of individuals grows, um, and others want to come and join their group, there's a set of norms that's acceptable. And it I just feel that morality can exist with or without the belief in a higher power. And I take that from a conversation that I had with an atheist, and I've studied a lot of world religions and philosophies, and I've had conversations with a lot of very deep thinkers. And one of the arguments, because I had similar thoughts on the subject, that without a belief in a higher power with divine authority to set uh, a set of morals that we're all to follow, that
Mhm.
it would be anarchy, and a the value of human life and decency would be non-existent. But that just isn't the truth. And when I posed that, it was like, so you're saying that I would need to believe in a higher power in order to be a decent person.
Oh, no, I don't think
And
so.
and
Mhm.
so that kind of shifted things for me, where I think that it is outside of some declaration or a set of divine laws or divine morals. It is whether or not that community accepts as a group what is right and what is wrong. So that's where I think a lot of the divergence comes from. As you go around the globe, there's there's different beliefs, there's different cultures. You can have one group of people on this side of the earth and another group of people on this side of the earth. Both of
Mhm.
them are Orthodox Jews, but they have different customs,
Mhm.
and
Uh, hmm.
it's they'll be very similar, but there will be different customs. And just
Okay.
like Christianity, different sects in Islam, um, there's different sects in Buddhism,
Yeah.
different, as
Can I dig in a little bit more on that?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
would you be comfortable to say that any culture has a wrong set of moral values or has a wrong moral practice? Like, would you be comfortable to say maybe like point to a culture? Let's say I don't know, Afghanistan or something, and say like child. What are they called? Um, Sending your daughters to get married when they're 10 or 11. Child marriages, maybe they're called. Would you be comfortable saying that's wrong, or would you just say that's the way they do things over there? There's no right or wrong in terms of
No, I
behaviors like
believe
that.
that there are different cultures around the globe, but I believe that there is a set of morals that encompasses the entire globe for
Okay.
humankind. Okay.
Okay.
And I do believe that there are cultures that have not evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that a lot of those behaviors go back to biblical times, and they were accepted back then and completely accepted. But in our society today, they're not accepted. And I feel that it's because we have a different understanding of mental health and what that kind of stuff can do to a person mentally and
Oh yeah.
physically, and
Mm-hmm.
just it's not good. So there is a
Yeah.
morality that I think evolves as we understand psychology and physiology better,
Mm-hmm.
as knowledge uh, is more accessible,
Yeah.
and those things that are abhorrent to us, there is a level of ignorance in
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the world,
Got it.
where do we judge people based on their ignorance, or and that's the thing, that's the dilemma that I've come up with when I've thought about these things, where would you it's not whether or not you accept that as being okay, because it's not okay, and I would never accept those things to be okay. or say, oh yeah, well, they don't know what they're doing. I think that it is a moral obligation for those in the world that do have knowledge to educate those societies and hopefully change the behavior so that we're not harming children. Uh, because I think
Mhm.
the fact that there is knowledge, but then you go into the conversation of whose responsibility is it? Since we know that it's happening, are we not guilty of looking the other way if we don't do anything about it?
Mhm. Yeah, so in your response, I'm definitely hearing you believe in objective morality, and
Yes, absolutely.
but I think the question that's coming to my mind is, do you not think the morality that you hold as an American at this time in history has been influenced probably very heavily by Christianity? And so the values you have are rooted in the Christian tradition over the past 2,000 years in the West. And so, do you
Yeah,
think there's a chance that maybe you're just a product of your culture as much as uh, the Muslim or the cannibal? Let's keep it simpler, maybe a simpler example, like the cannibal living in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. They're a product of their cultural and evolutionary history.
yeah, no,
What makes you so confident? Yeah, go ahead.
I do believe that I am a product of, you know, growing up uh, in a culture that is predominantly Christian. I was raised Lutheran. I went to a Southern Baptist private school. I had aspirations of becoming a minister and studied theology for quite some time. I got my bachelor's and master's degree from a private Catholic university. I'm not a stranger to Christianity, but I do believe that Christianity was influenced by older philosophies and traditions. And
Mhm.
and some of those philosophies and traditions are not theistic.
Well, I'm thinking back to like, so behind Christianity was Judaism. So Judaism is theistic. When I look at all the other cultures in the world and the moral systems that have come out of those cultures in the world, they're all different. Um, Christianity is also one of many different moral systems that have come up in the world over human history, but it's come to dominate maybe the West, what we call the West, over the past 2,000 years. And it's like the predominant like Western moral system in terms of values, taking God out of it, like just the universal human rights and values that are there in the UN Declaration are are pretty like humanistic values. Like these are pretty Christian values that have developed within that context.
Well, you
Um,
could see some crossover between Buddhism and Christianity, right? And
yes,
really there,
but the society. Go ahead.
you know, and Buddhism really doesn't believe in uh, a deity. It's more of, a infinite ball of energy, I guess, that we're all a part of, and that when we reach enlightenment, we become one with that energy. Um, but a lot of the moral teachings of Buddhism are, you know, very in line with Christianity.
So going back to Buddhism, so at the bottom of Buddhism, you're saying there is no God, it's atheistic, it's impersonal, there is no mind or consciousness uh, at the bottom of reality in that worldview. So, in that case, when I think about morality, I feel like morality is very, uh, it relates to individuals, it relates to interpersonal interactions, person to person interactions. That's what morality is all about. So if at the bottom of reality, there are no persons, there is no person, there is no individual consciousness, there are no relationships, how could that like foundation for reality, how does that prop up a morality that is interpersonal, that is so social, and that is objective um, and applies to all human beings? So like for me, there's like a gap there. There's like a if the fundamental reality is impersonal and unconscious, it seems like it's an infinite gap to cross from there to an objective morality that is so social and interpersonal, and that applies to all human beings, whether they believe in it or not. It is true for every human being. So that's the I guess the non-theistic worldview, and then but on the theistic worldview, you have at the bottom of reality a person, and in Christianity you have a trinity. You have a society of persons at the foundation of all reality, and so it kind of makes more sense to me that out of out of that fundamental society come social norms, these objective moral norms that would apply to other social beings, human beings, for example, and that could be um, objective and binding to those social beings. So for me, it seems like there's more compatibility in that theistic model for objective morality than a non-theistic worldview, where at the bottom of reality, there are no persons, like I don't mean bodies, but like there are no minds. It's just unconsciousness or just energy. Um, what do you think of
Well,
that?
well, isn't that what consciousness is energy?
Well, I'm distinguishing like consciousness from unconsciousness, I guess, like energy being unaware. It's just a force. There's no self-awareness in energy, as far as we know, right? So I'm distinguishing consciousness from unconsciousness.
Okay. Yeah, and so I would like from that perspective, I would like what's coming to my mind is in Christianity, when we die, if you know, there is a heaven, and after we die, we go to heaven, we are not aware of our loved ones here on earth or our loved ones that have passed before us. We won't recognize them, correct? I mean, I think there's based on your understanding of heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and that really is the continuation of our consciousness, right?
Yes, yes, I do believe that.
That's and that would be our soul,
Yeah,
right?
you can call it that. Yeah, mind.
And and so I think that, and this is just my understanding of it. I may be wrong, but when a Buddhist passes,
Mm-hmm.
either they're reincarnated or they reach enlightenment and they
Mm-hmm.
become one
Mm-hmm.
with everything,
Mm-hmm.
and and become part of this universal consciousness, essentially. So I
Or
don't believe that.
unconscious. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't believe that they just slip into oblivion and there's no awareness. I believe the reason they use the word enlightenment is because they are fully conscious and fully connected to everything in the cosmos. And that's kind of my understanding of what enlightenment is. It's how I don't know, defined it in my head. Um, you know, quite
Mhm.
frankly, my my thoughts are that it's very hard to definitively say that how I was brought up and the belief system that was taught to me is fully mine, and I
Mhm.
can conduct my life and follow what I believe to be right and true for myself. And if I'm wrong and it is, you know, some other version of theism out there that, you know, is the right one, or because I wasn't raised Catholic, maybe I was, you know, to make it to heaven, you've got to be Catholic and do certain rites of passage, get absolved of any mortal sins that I may have committed, to be able to live eternity and or experience eternity in heaven. Now, I think that there are some diehard Catholics that, if I'm a Protestant, I'm not going there. But as a Protestant, thinking that, somebody that um, has it wrong, maybe all Buddhists are going to go to hell, or um, all gays are going to burn in hell, or something like that. And there's a part of me that just cannot accept that, if God created everyone
Mhm.
and created everyone in his own image,
Mhm.
if we have the ability to create our own cultures and our own societies and our own values, are not, you know, is he really going to condemn people that express themselves a certain way and their understanding of the afterlife in
Mhm.
their way? Is he going to condemn them to an eternity in hell? And
Yeah.
or those that are born that identify, uh, they love the same sex, they, and or even, and this is where I have a tough time with the whole homosexuality thing, is what about the individuals that are born with both sexes?
Mhm.
Is that an abomination to God?
Right.
I would
He's
say
their creator.
no. Yeah, I would say no. And then when, a child or a baby is born with both sexes and a decision is made, okay, well, you can't go on like that your entire life. Let's sew this up or chop that off.
Mhm.
And now you're going to have to assimilate to what we have assigned you.
Mhm.
Um, and I just feel like there has to be, if there is a God and there is a savior, and I don't believe that this omniscient, omnipresent deity would say, all right, do this, you get
Mhm.
into heaven, you do that, you're going to hell. I think
Yeah.
that um, that is that is my that's that's my dilemma when it comes
Mhm.
to theism and atheism and philosophy. And I think that um, I can live my life the best I can and try and add value to as many people as possible and treat people with respect. And uh, when my time comes to an end, um, if there is an afterlife, hopefully I'll be welcomed with open arms. And if
Dude, I'd love to speak to that issue of hell. Um, I think, and I think it's a good one to maybe end on because I think it ties some of the themes we talked about in this conversation together.
yeah,
So, I think what helped me thinking through that was, I think, um, all these images of hell are they're images, they're pictures, whether it's in the Bible or through tradition and artwork. And I think a lot of our misperceptions about it are just an artifact of those expressions that were um, contextual to a
right.
certain time and place, maybe medieval Europe, maybe.
And just to clarify, like I do know that in in the Bible, it's really represented as just a separation from God.
Oh,
That
there are pictures of fire and burning
well, that
and all that.
I think the
Mhm.
pictures of fire and burning are more of, like you said. Uh, I don't believe that Jesus ever talked about that. Or, I
Mhm.
think it was more a man-made image of, like, you know,
Mhm.
burning and gnashing of teeth and all that. The
Right.
suffering
Yeah.
is meant to
Mhm.
equate that you are no
Mhm.
longer going to be in the presence of God. You are
Yes,
separated
that's
from Him.
which I think I've heard and I believe is far worse than burning in flames. So, what helped me actually understand this better for myself is I've heard a phrase in the end, um, we will say to God, Your will be done, or God will say to us, Your will be done. So, He made us, gave us free will, He gave us the ability to make our own decisions. And one view of hell that I've heard and I really like and I think fits in free will very well is in the end, we end up wherever we want to go. So the trajectory of our lives, some of us meet God and submit ourselves to Him and want to follow His will. And we say, Your will be done, God. I'll live my way, my life according to your will. And then there are others who say, um, who either never meet God or reject Him outright and say, I'm going to live the way I want to live. And in the end, because God respects free will, it's a gift He gave every human being. He says, You can go on the way you want to go on. Your will be done, person who wants to be by himself. And if you extend that out to eternity, you end up being separated from God completely. And I heard a phrase, the doors of hell are locked from the inside. It's not locked from the outside, like people are trying to get out. It's they shut the doors from the inside because they don't want to get out. They'd rather rule in hell than what is it? What is the word? I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven is kind of the mindset of people who are separated from God because they don't want to live under any authority other than their own. And that is what I view hell to be. It is a place set aside for those who want to continue on living for themselves and no other. And God says, Your will be done. That's the way I've viewed it. And I think it ties in free will and God's respect for it and also love for his people, that he's not going to override your free will. And he respects your choice in that way. And yeah, so what do you think of that picture? Like the doors of hell are locked from the inside. The people in there want to be there. They don't want to serve under God's authority and be with him and in relationship with him. They want to continue on being their own authorities, like the Lord of their own lives. And that and hell is just a picture of that place.
Well, I think that there would have to be a belief in God to make that decision of I'd rather serve in hell than, or I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven, there would have to be a belief in God. And I understand that there are some that believe that um, being presented a Bible, or you know, told told about the gospel of Jesus, or that is enough of an introduction for somebody to make a decision on eternity. And I would say that, I don't believe that that is the case, because I think that a lot of times when well, for me, after digging into Christianity and the canonization of the Bible, and knowing that so many things were left out of this book that is supposed to be the Word of God. And in my mind, it is the words of men and their best attempt at describing what Christianity is supposed to be, what, to lay out the image of who Jesus was. And the Old Testament is a way to lay out the genealogy to fulfill the prophecy of who the Son of God is, the Savior. And then you go from there. And then, in those days, there was belief that John the Baptist was the Savior. And then there was Jesus. And there's stories of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus. Now, my point in all of this is that the canonization came about because there was conflicting beliefs, and there was inconsistencies in all the different versions of Scripture. And all the leaders of the church came together to bring about one text that everybody could read and believe in. But it was so far separated from the time of Jesus. It's
I
hard.
think so. I mean, I've heard different things about the canon, but I think underneath that is, from your study, you have a sincere, you are sincerely skeptical about the claims of Christianity and the Bible, the reliability of the Bible. So you have these sincere doubts, and you can't believe it because of what you've read, what you believe about the process of the way the Bible has come together. You just don't think it's reliable, and so you are a sincere agnostic, or you're sincerely a non-Christian. And am I hearing, is the concern then, as a sincere non-Christian, as someone who's looked into these things and can't believe, will God punish me for my sincere skepticism? Is that underneath some of the examples?
So I would say that if I continue to live my life in service of mankind, I think I'm doing God's will. Um, if I violate, morality, I'll have to answer to that. But there is not definitive proof for me to say this is concrete and I can believe it with full faith. This is the only way for me to get into heaven, or if I don't believe this, I'm gonna go to hell.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that it's wrong to be Christian. Not at all. Um, I believe that I have a lot of the very same values. You know, I mean, I was raised in the church, so a lot of my values are consistent with Christianity. I would say that there are other uh, religions out there that are consistent with the same values. And so what are your thoughts on that? Should I be concerned?
No, I think a- anyone who's living for others is doing God's will. I, as a theist, yeah, I wouldn't object to that. What I believe God wants is a relationship with us, um, and doing good works and living for society. These things are they're good, but they don't earn they don't earn our way. They don't earn our salvation. These are just expressions of the relationship that we have with God because of our salvation that He's finished for us. So that's the gospel, right? He's done the work. He's already saved and rescued us. We're already adopted. We are already children, and like to the degree that we know that, we're going to live out lives of good work and good lives for society. We're going to add value and all that as a result, but not as a means of salvation, but kind of as a result of the fact that we are saved. So, yeah, maybe it sounds to me like maybe your understanding of Christianity is more maybe works based. If I do these things at the end of my life, my good works will be weighed against my sins, and if the scales come up in my favor, then I go to heaven. But
No,
that's not my
no,
understanding. Yeah.
no. That's not my understanding of Christianity either. As a matter of fact, the way I understand it is there is nothing that we can do as humans to earn a place in heaven. It is only uh, Jesus, the salvation provided to us through the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But is that salvation only given to those that believe? And I would say no. I think that there is going to be people that don't believe, and um, and I think that an all loving God
Mm.
gave His only Son to um, really adopt everyone.
Yeah, I think an all loving God who gave his son to die for everyone loves human beings to the point where he's not going to override our free will. Like he's going to respect our free will. Um, so for me, that kind of makes compatible the idea of hell as a place where people who freely choose to be separated from God are allowed to dwell or allowed to be. And while at the same time, an all loving God who uh, loves us and gave his son for us also has a place where his children can live with him in relationship forever. So that would be heaven. I think those concepts kind of tie okay for me, at least right now.
Yeah, no, I and a lot of this conversation is really just, I guess, thinking out loud, um,
Mhm.
where I understand your perspective, and I respect it a great deal. I just don't have the same perspective. From my position, I would say that an all-loving God that gives his son to be crucified by the Romans for man, humankind's salvation is, um, even, you know, Jesus on the cross, if you're to believe the story in the Bible, the Roman guard that stuck his spear in his side said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And
Jesus said that.
yeah, and so if that is the case, then I would say that salvation is for everyone. That
Hmm. I think there are Christians that do believe that. I think they're called universalists. There are Christians that do believe that salvation eventually will be extended to everyone, even the devil, maybe. So I think that is, it is a perspective that sits with inside the umbrella.
and so my point in this conversation is that I believe that having morals is not dependent on whether you believe in a God or you believe there is no God. I think there, and because I believe we took that path from talking about morals to talking about theism and atheism, and how
Mhm.
you can um, accept it more as
Mm.
being something that is um, kind of laid out for us by a higher power. Um, that
Yeah,
there is.
just
Go
to make
ahead.
a distinction there. So I think there is a difference between so there are at least two questions. One question is, how do people come to know morality? And I think in philosophy that's called like moral epistemology. So how do people come to know? And they may come to know in different ways. And the other question is, um, what grounds objective morality? And I think the
Okay,
the
that
category of
that's
that is
really
called,
what you were saying.
yeah, moral ontology is that question. Like what grounds morality, as opposed to how do people come to know it, and maybe can people be moral? Those are separate questions from what grounds morality. And I certainly agree with you and anyone. You don't have to believe in God to be a moral person. To even believe in, well, to know what is right and to do what is right doesn't depend on knowing God. So I would never say you have to be a Christian to be a good person or anything like that. I think the argument I was making was theism to me answers the question of moral ontology better than atheism or non-theism, because of what I think morality is, like the characteristics of morality being social and personal. um, I think fit better inside a theistic framework than a non-theistic framework, if that helps um, clarify the position.
Yeah, and but I would, just to play off of that a little bit, I would say that maybe not so much, because if you don't believe that there is any life after, or yeah, if there isn't any life after death, then the experiences that we have on earth is it. So to make the best of it,
Mhm.
to live a good life, and to be in harmony with the world around us, uh, kind of lends itself to saying, okay, you'll have a better life and
Mhm.
experience better things if you have good
Mhm.
morals.
Mhm.
Um,
but it's temporary. I think this is great because it's kind of going back to where we started talking about purpose and meaning. Like, if there is no purpose, ultimate purpose to the universe, to the earth, to human beings, then our morality is meaningless. It just becomes actions that we do that maybe give us a better life temporarily here on earth, but eventually the earth is going to burn up, the sun will burn up, the universe will, will equilibrate. And if there's no ultimate purpose, then it strips the meaning out of out of everything that happens. um, so I think maybe that's another question that you were alluding to. um, the non-theistic worldview does not have an ultimate purpose within it. um, and therefore, again, it makes objective morality, I think, less plausible, the way we understand morality as being. You and I believe morality is meaningful. There is a right way to live, a right way for societies to live. There are right and wrong behaviors, and these matter. They don't just matter for the here and now or for as long as human beings are on the earth. I think people in their hearts maybe believe these things matter universally. They're going to matter when the earth isn't around anymore. But it's hard to justify that belief on a non-theistic worldview as opposed to a theistic one.
Man, I tell you what, this has been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed it.
Me too, David. Thank you so much. You've got me thinking and asking different questions. I could go on for another hour, but
Yeah.
I really should get back to work before the end of the day.
Yeah. No, man, I really, really appreciate you coming on and talking with me. This has been very enjoyable. I really appreciate your perspective and the back and forth. It made for a great conversation, very meaningful to me. Made me think a lot as well. Uh, so I really, really appreciate it. And let's stay in touch, because I don't know, maybe I can talk to you about some other philosophical views, where I kind of feel like there are some Taoist underpinnings. Maybe there's this, I would say, a common thread from Taoism through Buddhism, Hinduism into Christianity. There's and I'd love to explore that with you another time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Because I
I'd
think
love
it's
to.
really, I think it's really interesting, and yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's pick this up again.
Yeah,
Thank you, David. Thanks so
yeah.
much.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform, and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.